The snow wasn't just falling. It was trying to bury a secret. Every flake was a tiny white lie, blanketing the ground, muffling the sound of the wagon that was abandoning us. I stood there, clutching a bundle to my chest that felt as useless as a prayer in a graveyard. My mother, Martha, leaned on me, her hand a claw on my arm. Her breaths were tiny puffs of smoke in the frozen air, each one looking like it might be her last. Behind us, the town of Harmony Creek wasn't just ignoring us, it was erasing us. Shutters slammed closed, curtains were drawn. It was like we had never even existed. My mother's stick scraped a thin, angry line in the fresh snow, the only mark we were allowed to leave. A signature of our exile. I heard a voice on the wind, sharp and cruel as broken glass. It was Pearl McKinn. "Good riddance," she hissed. "Two mouths we don't have to feed." My face burned, a strange fire in the biting cold. I wanted to scream, to throw their hypocrisy back in their faces, but Mama's weight on my arm was a constant reminder. Be strong for her. Be strong. Sheriff Amos Fletcher stood at the edge of town, a statue in a thick coat. He didn't say anything hateful like Pearl. He didn't have to. His silence was louder than any insult. It was the silence of a man who had slammed a door in your face and nailed it shut. His eyes met mine, and for a second, I saw something that looked like regret. But it was gone in a flash, buried under a lifetime of choosing the easy way over the right way. "Keep moving," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Don't let the dark catch you out here." Then he turned his back. The conversation was over. We were over. We were nothing but ghosts now, pushed out into the great white empty. I looked down at the bundle in my arms. 2 cracked bowls, a threadbare blanket, and 1 last loaf of bread. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But I squared my shoulders and took a step, then another. The prairie opened up before us, a vast, unforgiving sea of white. My boots were thin, the leather cracked, and soon I couldn't feel my toes at all. The cold was a thief, stealing the feeling from my body piece by piece. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time didn't seem to matter out here. There was only the crunch of my boots, the scrape of Mama's stick, and the whistle of the wind. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the snow in shades of purple and gray. The cold got deeper, sharper. It felt like the air itself was turning to ice. Then, Mama stumbled. Her knees just gave out, and she sank into the snow. I caught her, lowering her gently. Her lips were blue. "Go back, Annie Mae," she whispered, her voice a fragile thing. "Leave me. Save yourself." I pressed my forehead against hers. Her skin was like ice. "Never, Mama," I said, my own voice shaking. "We're in this together, always." A single tear slid down her wrinkled cheek and froze solid before it could fall. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed its way up my throat. We needed shelter. We needed a fire. We needed a miracle. Or we would die. I hauled her back to her feet, half carrying, half dragging her through the deepening drifts. My muscles screamed. My lungs burned. Every step was a war against the wind and the snow and the voice in my head that told me to just give up. The world was a blur of white, just snow and sky and the feeling of failure. I was so focused on putting one foot in front of the other that I almost didn't see it. A shape. A dark figure standing at the edge of a line of pine trees, still as a statue. My heart hammered against my ribs. Was it a bandit? An animal? The figure started moving towards us. I could see a rifle slung over his back. A big dog trotted at his side, its eyes glowing like embers in the twilight. I froze, pulling my mother behind me, trying to make my own small body into a shield. He stopped a few feet away. His face was hidden in the shadow of his hat, his beard dusted with snow. He just stood there, looking at us. His gaze went from my face, raw and red from the wind, to my mother's frail, trembling body. He didn't say a word. The town had thrown us out. The people I had known my whole life had turned their backs. What could I expect from a stranger in the wild? A man with a rifle, and the kind of stillness that comes from a life lived far from the mercy of others. Then he spoke. His voice was deep, swallowed almost completely by the storm. "You're Martha Carter's girl." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. My breath caught in my throat. He knew her name. He knew who we were. This wasn't a random encounter. He had been waiting for us. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. How could this stranger, this mountain man, know my mother's name? He took a step closer, and the dog beside him whined softly, a strange, sad sound. "I'm Jedediah Boone," he said. The name meant nothing to me. "You're coming with me." Again, not a question. A command. But his tone wasn't threatening. It was certain, as if this was how things were always meant to be. I clutched Mama tighter, my knuckles white. My little bundle of possessions slipped from my numb fingers, and the last of our bread tumbled into the snow. The dog nosed at it for a second, then looked up at Jedediah and sat, obedient. To follow this man was to walk into a complete unknown, but to stay here was certain death. I looked at my mother's face, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow. The choice was already made. Jedediah Boone turned without another word and started walking towards the trees. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He knew we would follow. I picked up Mama's stick, slung her thin arm over my shoulder, and stumbled after him into the darkness of the forest. The snow fell harder, covering our tracks, erasing us from the prairie just as the town had erased us from its memory. It felt like we were walking into the mouth of a beast, but it was a beast that offered warmth, and right now, that was all that mattered. The woods were dark and quiet, the tall pines swallowing the sound of the storm. Jedediah's cabin was tucked away in a small clearing, looking like it had grown right out of the ground. Smoke curled from its stone chimney, a promise of life in this frozen wasteland. He pushed the door open and stood aside. A wave of heat washed over me, and it was the most wonderful feeling I had ever known. The cabin was one small room, clean and simple. Pelts hung on the walls, and a fire crackled in the hearth. Jedediah led my mother to a simple wooden chair by the fire, his movements surprisingly gentle for such a large man. He ladled some kind of hot broth into a bowl and handed it to her. She took it with trembling hands and drank, a little bit of color slowly returning to her cheeks. He then gave a bowl to me. I hesitated. Taking his food felt like admitting defeat. But then I looked at my mother, her eyes pleading with me, and I took the bowl. The broth was thin, but it was hot, and it chased away some of the deep, gnawing cold inside me. He didn't eat. He just watched us, his face unreadable in the flickering firelight. After a long silence, he spoke again. "The town," he said, his voice a low rumble. "They finally did it then. Threw you out." It wasn't a question. He already knew. "How did you know who we were?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "How did you know to find us?" He looked at the fire, the flames dancing in his dark eyes. "I've been watching," he said. "Watching and waiting." "Waiting for what?" The words hung in the air, 1,000 new questions swirling in my mind. Who was this man? And what did he want with us? He didn't offer any more answers. He simply banked the fire for the night, laid out some blankets for us on the floor, and settled into a chair in the corner, his rifle resting against the wall beside him. His dog curled up at his feet. I lay there, listening to the sound of my mother's steady breathing and the howl of the wind outside. I was warmer than I had been in days, but I had never felt so cold. We had escaped the storm, but I had a terrible feeling we had just walked into something far more dangerous. The next few days were a blur of snow and silence. The storm trapped us inside the tiny cabin, the world shrinking to these 4 log walls. Jedediah rarely spoke. He was a man of action, not words. He'd chop wood, check his traps, mend his gear, all with a quiet intensity that was both unnerving and fascinating. I tried to make myself useful. I swept the floor, mended one of his torn shirts, and tended to his dog, who I learned was named Timber. I was trying to earn our keep, to prove we weren't just a burden. But every time I caught Jedediah looking at me, or at my mother, I saw something in his eyes I couldn't understand. It wasn't pity. It was something deeper, something that looked almost like recognition. One afternoon, while he was outside, I decided to organize his small shelf of supplies. Tucked behind some tins of coffee, my fingers brushed against something hard and smooth. I pulled it out. It was a small bird, carved from a piece of dark wood. My breath caught in my chest. It was identical to a carving my father had made for me when I was a little girl. A whittled robin with one wing slightly higher than the other. I'd lost it years ago. How could this be here? My father had been dead for over a decade. He was a quiet man, a blacksmith, not a woodsman. He had no connection to a man like Jedediah Boone. Or so I thought. When Jedediah came back inside, I held up the carving. My hand was shaking. "Where did you get this?" He stopped in his tracks, his eyes locking onto the bird. The usual stoic mask on his face fell away, replaced by a flicker of pain, of old memory. "My father made it," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "He made two. One for his son, and one for his best friend's daughter." My head was spinning. "My father," I whispered. "His name was Thomas Carter." Jedediah nodded slowly. "I know. He and my father, Samuel Boone, grew up together. They were like brothers." It was impossible. My father had never spoken of a Samuel Boone. He had never mentioned a best friend who lived out in the mountains. He had always been a man of the town, through and through. "Why would he never tell me?" I asked, confusion and a strange sense of betrayal washing over me. "Because after the fire," Jedediah said, his voice dropping so low I could barely hear him, "it was safer for everyone if the Boones and the Carters were forgotten." The fire. He said it like I should know what he was talking about. I remembered whispers, fragments of stories from when I was very young. A terrible fire at the old mill, years before I was born. People had died. The town never liked to talk about it. It was a dark chapter in Harmony Creek's history. Suddenly, my mother, who had been dozing by the fire, spoke up. Her voice was thin but clear. "The deed," she murmured, her eyes still closed. "They burned it all for the deed." Jedediah and I both turned to look at her. She was talking in her sleep, lost in a dream, or a memory. "Pearl's father. The old sheriff. They said it was an accident, but it wasn't. It was never an accident." My blood ran cold. Pearl McKinn's father? The old sheriff? Amos Fletcher's father? What did they have to do with a fire from decades ago? Jedediah looked at me, his eyes dark and serious. "Your mother knows," he said. "She knows the truth of how this town was built. And that's the real reason they threw you out, Annie Mae. They weren't trying to save food. They were trying to bury the last witness." The truth hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't about us being a burden. It was about what my mother knew. She was a living link to a crime the town's founding families had committed, a crime they had built their fortunes on. Pearl McKinn and Sheriff Fletcher weren't just cruel. They were finishing what their fathers had started. They were trying to silence the last echo of the truth. Jedediah paced the small cabin, the floorboards groaning under his weight. "My father died in that fire," he said, his voice tight with a grief that was still raw after all these years. "Along with two other men who wouldn't sell their land. The official story was that it was a tragic accident, a spark from the mill's furnace." He stopped and looked at me, his gaze intense. "But it was arson. they set the fire to destroy the land registry office that was housed in the mill. They destroyed the original deeds and then produced forged copies, claiming all the land for themselves. Your father, Thomas, was just a boy, but he knew something was wrong. His father sent him away to keep him safe. He never told you about us because he was trying to protect you from them. It was all too much. My entire life, the town I grew up in, was built on a foundation of lies and murder. And my mother had carried this terrible secret for decades, living in fear among the very people who had destroyed so many lives. So what now? I asked, my voice trembling. They think we're dead. They think they've won. Jedediah stopped pacing and picked up the small wooden bird. He ran his thumb over its smooth surface. They think we're gone, he said, a dangerous glint in his eye. But they're wrong. The snow will melt. And when it does, we're going back to Harmony Creek. Not for shelter, not for charity. He looked up at me, and I saw a man who had been waiting his entire life for this moment. We're going back for justice. A week later, the storm finally broke, but we were still prisoners of the snow. During that time, a fragile alliance formed between me and Jedediah. He told me stories of our fathers, of their friendship, and of the town before it was poisoned by greed. And I began to understand the quiet, simmering anger that had driven him to live a life of isolation. He wasn't hiding from the world. He was waiting for it to be ready for the truth. One afternoon, there was a knock at the door. It was so unexpected that both Jedediah and I froze. Timber let out a low growl. Jedediah grabbed his rifle, motioning for me to get my mother into the small loft above. He opened the door a crack. It was a trapper, a man named Silas, his shoulders covered in snow. He said he was just passing through, seeking shelter from the wind. But I saw the way his eyes darted around the cabin, taking everything in. He wasn't just a trapper. Jedediah seemed to know it too, but he played along, offering the man a seat by the fire. Silas made small talk, asking about the hunting season, but his questions felt pointed. He kept asking how long Jedediah had been living out here alone. Had any visitors this winter? Silas asked, his eyes flicking towards the 2 extra bowls sitting on the table. My heart pounded in my chest. I had forgotten to put them away. Jedediah didn't miss a beat. Just the usual, he said calmly. Wind, snow, and the occasional hungry wolf. He stared at Silas, his hand resting casually on the stock of his rifle. You have to be careful what you let in your door out here. The threat was unspoken but crystal clear. Silas forced a laugh, but his eyes were wary. He finished his coffee quickly and made his excuses to leave. As he stood up, he accidentally knocked a small pouch from his belt. It fell to the floor, and a key spilled out. A small, ornate brass key. He quickly scooped it up, but not before I saw it, and I saw the look that passed between him and Jedediah. After Silas was gone, Jedediah bolted the door. He's one of them, he said. A cousin of Pearl McKinn. They sent him to see if we were really gone, to see if I had taken you in. He looked at me. That key, I recognize it. It's for the lockbox in the sheriff's office, the one where they keep the town records. My mind raced. The forged deeds, the proof of their crime. It would all be in that box. That night, my mother's health took a turn for the worse. She began to cough, a deep, rattling sound that shook her whole body. A fever set in, and she became delirious. I did everything I could, brewing teas from the herbs Jedediah had, placing cool cloths on her forehead. But the fever wouldn't break. In her delirium, she started to talk, her voice a ghostly whisper. The old oak, she muttered. By the creek. Thomas hid it there, the real one, before the fire. My blood turned to ice. Thomas, my father. She was talking about my father. Jedediah knelt by her side. Martha, he said gently. What did Thomas hide? The ledger, she whispered, her eyes wide and unseeing. His father was the clerk. He kept a second copy, a secret ledger. He knew they were coming. He gave it to Thomas. It was a bombshell, a second copy of the original land deeds, not destroyed in the fire. Hidden. For decades. My father had known. He had possessed the one thing that could bring the McKinn and Fletcher families to ruin, and he had hidden it. That was why he had sent his son, Jedediah's father's best friend, away. It was why he lived his whole life in quiet fear. He wasn't just protecting me. He was protecting the truth. Suddenly, her breathing became shallow, her body convulsing. "We have to get her to a doctor," I cried, panic seizing me. "She's not going to make it." Jedediah placed a hand on her forehead. His face was grim. "The roads are still impassable. A doctor can't get through. And we can't take her back to town. Fletcher would sooner let her die than help." He looked at me, his jaw set. "There's another way. There's an old medicine woman, an herbalist, who lives on the other side of this mountain. It's a dangerous journey, but she might be our only hope." He stood up and started packing a small bag with supplies. "You stay here. Keep her warm. I'll be back as soon as I can." "No," I said, standing up to face him. "I'm going with you." He started to protest, but I cut him off. "She's my mother. I'm not leaving her side, and I'm not letting you go alone. We'll go together." He looked at me for a long moment, seeing the iron resolve in my eyes. He gave a single sharp nod. "All right," he said. "Get your coat. We leave in 5 minutes." The journey was a nightmare. We fought our way through chest-deep snow, the wind tearing at us like a physical beast. Jedediah led the way, his strength seeming almost inhuman. We reached the herbalist's small hut just as dawn was breaking, both of us half frozen and exhausted. Her name was Alara, and her face was a road map of wrinkles, her eyes sharp and knowing. She took one look at my mother and immediately set to work, mixing potions and applying poultices. For 2 days we watched and waited as Alara fought to bring my mother back from the brink. On the 3rd morning, the fever broke. Mama's breathing eased, and she opened her eyes, her mind clear for the first time in days. Relief washed over me so powerfully, my knees buckled. As we prepared to make the journey back to Jedediah's cabin, Alara took my hand. "Your mother is strong," she said. "But the secret she carries is a heavy burden. It has been poisoning her from the inside out for a very long time." She looked me straight in the eye. "Sometimes the only cure is the truth." Back in the cabin, with my mother weak but recovering, a new sense of urgency settled over us. We had 2 pieces of a puzzle: a key to a lockbox filled with forgeries, and the location of a hidden ledger containing the truth. "The old oak by the creek," Jedediah said, thinking aloud. "I know the one. It's on the edge of the McKinn property now. Getting to it won't be easy." We knew we couldn't wait. Silas's visit meant that Fletcher and McKinn were suspicious. They would be watching. They might even send more men. We had to act, and we had to act fast. That night, under the cover of a moonless sky, we set out. We left my mother sleeping by the fire, Timber standing guard over her. The journey back towards Harmony Creek was fraught with tension. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every snap of a twig sounded like a rifle cocking. We moved like ghosts through the trees, circling around the town to approach the McKinn property from the woods. The old oak was massive, its branches like skeletal fingers against the night sky. It stood right where Mama had said, just a few yards from the creek. Jedediah ran his hands over the base of the trunk, searching for a loose stone, a hidden hollow. I held my breath, scanning the darkness around us. Suddenly, a light flickered in the distance. A lantern. Someone was coming. We dove behind a cluster of rocks, our hearts pounding. 2 figures emerged from the darkness. It was Sheriff Fletcher and one of his deputies. They were making a late-night patrol. "You really think they're out here?" the deputy asked. "Pearl is getting spooked," Fletcher replied, his voice a low growl. She thinks that old woman might have told the girl something before she kicked off. I just want to make sure their tracks lead away from here, and stay away. They walked right past our hiding spot, their boots crunching in the snow just feet from where we lay. The urge to bolt was overwhelming, but we stayed perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe until they were gone. Once the coast was clear, we went back to the tree. Here, Jedediah whispered, his fingers finding a loose piece of bark. He pried it away, revealing a hollow space inside. He reached in and pulled out a small, oilskin-wrapped package. The ledger. We had it. The proof. We didn't go back to the cabin. It wasn't safe anymore. We found a small hidden cave that Jedediah knew of and built a small, smokeless fire. By its faint light, we carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a leather-bound book. The pages were yellowed with age, but the ink was still clear. It was a perfect record of every land title, every transaction, all signed and sealed by the town's first clerk, Jedediah's great-grandfather. It was irrefutable proof. The names of the men whose land had been stolen, including Samuel Boone, were all there. The final pages contained a handwritten entry from the clerk, dated the day before the fire. He wrote of his suspicions, of the threats made by Pearl's father and the old sheriff. He wrote that he had given this copy to his trusted friend, the blacksmith, for safekeeping. He had entrusted the truth to my family. "So this is it," I said, tracing the elegant script with my finger. "This changes everything." Jedediah nodded, but his face was grim. "This ledger is useless if we can't get it in front of the right people. Fletcher controls the town. No one will dare to stand against him without a guarantee they'll win." He was right. We couldn't just walk into town and accuse the sheriff. He would arrest us on some trumped-up charge and the ledger would disappear forever. We needed a plan. We needed to be smarter than them. "The spring festival," I said, a thought slowly forming in my mind. "It's in 2 weeks. The whole town will be there. Even Judge Miller from the Capitol comes for it every year. He's the only one with more authority than Fletcher." Jedediah looked at me, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "They'll have extra security. They'll be watching for any trouble." "They'll be watching for you," I corrected him. "The big, mysterious mountain man. But they won't be watching for me. I'm just a girl. The girl they cast out. They'll think I'm broken. They won't see me as a threat." A daring plan began to take shape. Jedediah would create a diversion on one side of town, drawing Fletcher and his men away from the festival. While they were gone, I would get to the church, where the judge always gave his annual address. I would get the ledger to him. I would tell the entire town the truth. It was incredibly risky. If we failed, we would lose everything. But as I looked at the ledger in my hands, the legacy of truth my family had protected for so long, I knew we had to try. We weren't just fighting for our fathers anymore. We were fighting for the very soul of Harmony Creek. The 2 weeks leading up to the festival were the most intense of my life. Jedediah taught me how to move silently through the woods, how to use the terrain to my advantage. We went over the plan again and again, anticipating every possible thing that could go wrong. We brought my mother and Timber to the hidden cave, where they would be safe. She was still weak, but her eyes held a fire I hadn't seen in years. "Be careful, Annie Mae," she whispered, pressing the oilskin package into my hands. "But be brave. Your father would be so proud." On the day of the festival, a nervous energy buzzed through me. I dressed in my old, worn clothes, making myself look as small and harmless as possible. Jedediah and I synchronized our watches, a simple pocket watch he had that had belonged to his father. At precisely 1 o'clock, he would start the diversion. That would give me a 30-minute window to get from the edge of the woods, through the town square, and to the church. The wait was agonizing. I watched from a ridge overlooking the town. The square was filled with people, colorful banners flapping in the breeze. It all looked so normal, so peaceful. a perfect facade for the darkness that lay beneath. At 1 o'clock, I heard it. A loud explosion from the direction of the old quarry, followed by thick black smoke billowing into the sky. Jedediah had done his part. I saw Sheriff Fletcher and his deputies jump on their horses and gallop towards the smoke. It was time. I took a deep breath and started to run. I moved through the alleys and side streets, keeping to the shadows. My heart was a drum against my ribs. I could hear the music and laughter from the town square. People were distracted, their attention split between the festival and the commotion at the quarry. It was working. I reached the back of the church and slipped inside through a side door used by the choir. The main hall was packed. Judge Miller was already on the dais, preparing to speak. I could see Pearl McKinn sitting in the front pew, looking smug and self-important. I clutched the ledger under my shawl and started to make my way down the side aisle, trying to look like I was just finding a place to stand. A hand clamped down on my shoulder. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. It was the deputy, the one who had been with Fletcher at the oak tree. "What are you doing here?" he snarled. "You're not welcome in this town." He must have stayed behind, or come back early. My window was closing. I just wanted to listen to the judge," I stammered, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "Get out," he said, his grip tightening. "Now." He started to pull me towards the door. This was it. It was all falling apart. I had to do something. I looked past him, towards the front pew. I saw Pearl McKinn watching us, a cruel smile playing on her lips. She thought she had won. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I wasn't that scared girl they threw out into the snow anymore. "Let go of me!" I shouted, my voice ringing through the suddenly silent church. Everyone turned to look. The deputy was stunned. I wrenched my arm free and took a step towards the dais. "I have something to say!" Judge Miller looked down at me, his expression a mixture of surprise and annoyance. "Young lady, this is highly irregular." "The founding of this town was irregular, Your Honor," I said, my voice gaining strength. I pulled the ledger out from under my shawl and held it up for everyone to see. "This is the town's original land ledger, the one everyone thought was burned in the mill fire 30 years ago." A gasp went through the crowd. Pearl McKinn's face went pale. The deputy started towards me again, but the judge held up a hand, stopping him. "Go on," he said, his eyes fixed on the book in my hands. I told them everything. I told them about the land grab, the arson, the murders. I told them how the McKinn and Fletcher families had built their power on the ashes of other men's lives. I told them how my mother was exiled because she was the last person who knew the truth. As I spoke, I could see the faces in the crowd changing. Doubt turning into suspicion, suspicion turning into dawning horror. These were people who had lived under the thumb of the Fletchers and McKinns for years, too afraid to speak up. But now, with the proof right there in front of them, the fear began to turn into anger. "She's lying!" Pearl shrieked, jumping to her feet. "It's all lies! That book is a fake!" Just then, the main doors of the church burst open. Sheriff Fletcher stood there, his face red with fury. He had realized the diversion was a trick. "Arrest her!" he bellowed, pointing at me. "She's disturbing the peace." The deputy moved to grab me, but several of the townsmen, men whose families I knew had been pushed around by Fletcher for years, stepped in front of me, blocking his path. "Let's hear her out, Sheriff," one of them said, his voice firm. Fletcher's eyes bulged. He was losing control. He drew his pistol. "I said, arrest her!" he roared. At that moment, another figure appeared in the doorway behind him. It was Jedediah. He wasn't carrying a rifle. He was just standing there, a silent, powerful presence. "It's over, Amos," he said, his voice calm and steady, but carrying through the entire church. "The lies are done." Fletcher spun around, his gun aimed at Jedediah. You! He spat. I should have known you were behind this. Judge Miller banged his gavel. Sheriff Fletcher, put that weapon down. These are serious accusations, backed by what appears to be significant evidence. He looked out at the silent, watching crowd. I am placing you and Ms. McKinn under official inquiry. Hand your weapon and your badge to your deputy. For a long second, Fletcher stood there, his gun wavering between Jedediah and the judge. You could see the desperation in his eyes, the realization that his entire world was crumbling. Then, with a defeated sigh, he slowly lowered the gun. The spell was broken. The reign of the Fletchers and the McKinns was over. In the days that followed, everything changed. Judge Miller's investigation confirmed every word in the ledger. The forged deeds were found in the sheriff's lockbox. The truth, once revealed, was like a flood, washing away decades of lies. Pearl McKinn and Amos Fletcher were arrested and taken away to face trial in the capital. The land was rightfully returned to the families of the men who had been murdered, with the largest portion going to its sole surviving heir, Jedediah Boone. The town of Harmony Creek had a chance to start over, to build a new foundation based on truth instead of secrets. Jedediah didn't stay a recluse. The people, seeing him not as a wild mountain man but as the man who had brought them justice, elected him as the new town sheriff. He accepted, not for the power, but for the responsibility to ensure that nothing like this could ever happen again. I brought my mother back from the cave. We didn't move back into our old small house. Jedediah insisted we move with him into the main house on the Boone property, the one his father had been building before the fire. It was a home, a real home, filled not with silence and fear, but with warmth and a sense of belonging I had never known. The shame that had been branded on me was gone, replaced by a quiet dignity. I was no longer the girl who had been cast out. I was the girl who had come back and fought for the truth. One evening, as the sun set over the valley, I stood with Jedediah on the porch of our new home. My mother was inside, humming softly by the fire. Timber was asleep at our feet. The air was crisp and clean. "Thank you," I said softly, looking at him, "for everything." He looked at me, and for the first time I saw him smile. A real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Our fathers would be proud of us, Annie Mae," he said. "We had found more than just justice. We had found a family. We had found a home. And we had learned that even after the coldest, darkest winter, the spring will always come." What do you think is the most important part of seeking justice? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of truth and survival.